The day I retired, I should have felt free. 30 years of scrubbing floors, folding strangers' laundry, and swallowing my pride at Smith Home Services. Finally over, I walked into my quiet house, the weight of a lifetime of work lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in decades, I hummed. Then I checked my bank account. 155,000. That was all that remained of the nest egg I'd built, penny by penny, sacrifice after sacrifice. My hands shook. My breath came sharp and shallow. This wasn't right. There should have been more. So much more. I drove to the bank like a woman possessed. The teller handed me the transaction history, with a polite smile that made me want to scream. Page after page, line after line. 3,000 withdrawals, every month, like clockwork. 30 years of my life, siphoned away without my knowledge. When I got home, I tore through Lewis's office. His ledger was pristine, every expense accounted for. Except mine. And then I saw it, scribbled in the margin like an afterthought: living expenses for Bianca and the kids. My stomach dropped. Bianca. His sister, the one he swore he barely spoke to. The front door opened. Lewis walked in, took one look at me clutching his ledger. And his face twisted with anger. What the hell are you doing going through my things? I didn't answer. I slapped him. Hard. The numbers on the screen didn't change no matter how long I stared. 155,000. That was it. After 30 years of working my fingers to the bone, after skipping vacations, patching clothes instead of buying new ones, after eating leftovers for days just to save a little more, this was all I had left. My hands were ice. My pulse roared in my ears. I scrolled again, as if the digits would magically correct themselves. They didn't. I called the bank. The woman on the phone was polite, patient. Yes, she could see the withdrawals. No, there was no error. $3,000, every month, transferred to an external account. For years. Do you recognize the recipient? She asked. I didn't. The account number meant nothing to me. I hung up and sat there, numb. 30 years. All that time, all that sacrifice, and someone had been helping themselves to my money like it was theirs. I needed answers. I grabbed my keys and drove to the bank, my knuckles white on the wheel. The manager printed the full transaction history without argument. The numbers glared up at me in black and white. 3,000. Every month. Like clockwork. And then, the final twist of the knife. The withdrawals had started the same year Lewis's sister, Bianca, had gotten divorced. The same year he'd told me we couldn't afford to fix the leak in the roof. The same year our son, Matt, had begged for braces, and Lewis had said no. Money was too tight. I folded the paper slowly, carefully, like it might explode in my hands. Then I went home to tear Lewis's office apart. The bank manager's office smelled like cheap coffee and stale paperwork. I sat stiffly in the chair, my knees locked together to keep them from shaking. Across the desk, he slid a stack of papers toward me. Transaction records stretching back years. These transfers were authorized, he said carefully. By who? My voice came out sharper than I meant. He hesitated. The secondary account holder. I stared. There is no secondary account holder. The manager's fingers tapped the keyboard. The screen tilted away from me, but I saw the flicker of realization cross his face. Your husband was added in 1992. The year after we married. The year Bianca's husband left her. My vision tunneled. 30 years. $3,000 every month. Over $1 million gone. I stood so fast the chair screeched. The manager flinched. I need copies. Now. Outside, the sunlight felt like an insult. I drove home with the papers burning a hole in my passenger seat. Lewis' car wasn't in the driveway. Good. I needed time. His office was neat, always neat. The bastard even alphabetized his paper clips. I yanked open file drawers, scattering folders until I found it. A black ledger, thick with decades of entries. Page after page of meticulous notes, groceries, utilities, Bianca's rent, Bianca's car payments, Bianca's kids' tuition, and at the bottom of every page, the same calculated subtraction from our savings. The front door opened. Stella. Lewis called. Why's the office? He stopped in the doorway, taking in the mess, the ledger in my hands. His face went slack, then hardened. You had no right, he said. I nearly laughed. The ledger trembled in my hands. Lewis stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes darting from the scattered files to my face. The silence between us was thick enough to choke on. "You've been stealing from me," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Louis' jaw tightened. "It's not stealing when it's family." Family. A bitter laugh clawed its way up my throat. "You told Matt we couldn't afford his asthma medication. You made me work double shifts when Bianca needed help." His face flushed red. She was struggling. What was I supposed to do? I flipped the ledger open to a random page and thrust it at him. "Pay her electric bill instead of ours. Send her kids to private school while Mason wore second-hand shoes." He didn't even look at the page. "You re-exaggerating." The numbers blurred in front of me. 30 years of sacrifice reduced to a spreadsheet of betrayal. I thought of all the times I'd gone without new glasses, dental work, that anniversary trip we skipped because money was tight. My knees gave out. I caught myself on the desk. Louis took a step forward. "Stella, Dawn T." I held up a hand. The wedding band I'd worn for 3 decades glinted under the fluorescent light. "Just, Dawn T." Something in my voice stopped him cold. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not guilt, fear. The fear of a man who realizes his lies are crumbling. The room spun. I focused on breathing. In, out. Like the doctor taught me when the panic attacks started last year. Louis cleared his throat. "We should talk about this rationally." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The receding hairline I'd watched inch back year by year. The permanent frown lines from a lifetime of pinching pennies. My husband. My thief. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. And for the first time in 30 years, I meant it. The pages of the ledger felt like evidence in a crime scene. I spread them across the kitchen table, the numbers screaming at me in Louis' neat accountant handwriting. March 2001 Bianca rent farm 200 August 2005 Dispraces 3 500 June 2012 Lisa's college deposit 5,000 Every entry was a knife twist. I remembered each of those months. The summer we couldn't fix the air conditioning. The winter we skipped Christmas presents. All while Louis funneled our money to his sister. I flipped to the earliest pages. The withdrawals started small. 500 here, 800 there. Then like clockwork increasing to $3,000 every single month. The math made me physically ill. A noise at the door. Louis stood watching me, his face unreadable. "You kept records," I said. "Like you were proud of it." He crossed his arms. I was being responsible. Responsible. My voice cracked. "You lied to me for 30 years! For God's sake, Stella." He rubbed his temples like I was giving him a headache. Bianca was drowning after the divorce. Was I supposed to let her sink? I stabbed my finger at an entry from 1998. "You paid for her Caribbean vacation the same month you told me we couldn't afford Matt's tonsillectomy." Louis' face darkened. "That was different." "How?" "Because he's our son." The words exploded out of him. He could tough it out.
"Bianca, didn't he have anyone?"
The room went silent. I stared at my husband, really seeing him for the first time. The way his lip curled when he said "our son." The defensive hunch of his shoulders. The complete absence of remorse. Something inside me broke. I closed the ledger with deliberate calm. "Get out." Louis blinked. "What?" "Get out." I stood, my legs steady for the first time all day. "Before I do something we'll both regret." For a second, I thought he'd argue. Then he grabbed his keys and left, the door slamming like a gunshot behind him. The silence was deafening. The ledger fell open to a dog-eared page from 2009. The year Matt broke his arm. I remembered Louis pacing the waiting room, arguing with the billing department about payment plans. Meanwhile, this page showed a 112,000 transfer labeled Bianca kitchen remodel dated that same week. My fingers left damp smudges on the paper. Then I saw it. Tucked in the margin, nearly faded with time, "living expenses for Bianca and the kids non-negotiable." The words blurred. 30 years of "we can't afford it" suddenly made sense. All those clipped coupons, second-hand clothes, skip doctor visits, not sacrifices for our future. Subsidies for Louis' secret second family. The garage door rumbled. Louis was back. I didn't move when he entered the kitchen. He froze at the sight of the ledger, his nostrils flaring. "You went through my things again." I turned the book toward him, tapping the damning notation. Non-negotiable. Louis' jaw worked. "You wouldn't have understood. Try me." He yanked the ledger away. Bianca was in trouble. Her husband left her with nothing. What was I supposed to do? Let my sister live on the street. Funny. My voice sounded eerily calm. When my mother got sick, you said we couldn't take help. Too expensive, remember? That was different. How? Because, he cut himself off, but the unspoken words hung between us. Because she was your family, not mine. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. I studied this stranger I'd shared a bed with for 3 decades. The tight set of his mouth, the defensive hunch of his shoulders. Not an ounce of shame, just anger that he'd been caught. You stole from me, I said quietly. Louis slammed the ledger shut. It was my money too, and there it was. The truth laid bare. I walked to the hall closet, pulled out his suitcase, and set it on the kitchen table with a thud. Start packing. The suitcase sat between us like an accusation. Louis stared at it, then at me, his face twisting through shock, anger, and finally something dangerously close to amusement. You serious? I didn't blink. Deadly. He barked a laugh. That same condescending chuckle he used when Matt brought home bad grades. Over money. After 30 years. Over $1 million of lies, I corrected. My hands stayed steady at my sides. And 30 years of watching me struggle while you played hero to Bianca. Louis's smile vanished. He stepped closer, looming the way he did when he wanted to intimidate. You ungrateful bitch. Who paid the mortgage? Who kept food on the table? I did. The words tore from my throat. With my back, my hands, my overtime shifts at the hospital, while you funneled our savings to your. His palm cracked across my face. The impact snapped my head sideways. My cheek burned. For a heartbeat, we both froze. Him wide-eyed at what he'd done, me tasting blood where my teeth cut my lip. Then I laughed. It bubbled up uncontrollably, harsh and jagged. Louis took a step back, unnerved. That's it. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. That's your grand defense. Hit the hysterical woman. His chest heaved. You pushed me to pack your bags. I enunciated each word slowly, like speaking to a child. Or I call the cops right now and show them the ledger. Let's see how Bianca likes visiting you in prison for financial abuse. A vein pulsed in his temple. For a wild moment, I thought he might hit me again. Then his shoulders slumped. The wounded martyr. You'll regret this, he muttered, snatching the suitcase. I watched him stomp down the hall, my stinging cheek proof of what 30 years of marriage had really been worth. The bedroom door slammed. I picked up the ledger, ran my finger over the damning entries, and reached for my phone. Time to call a lawyer. The metallic taste of blood lingered on my tongue as I watched Louis throw clothes into the suitcase with jerky, violent motions. His dress shoes clattered against the hardwood. The same ones he'd refused to replace last year, because we needed to be frugal. I leaned against the doorframe, ledger still in hand. Take your time. The locksmith comes in an hour. Louis whirled, a wad of socks clenched in his fist. You really doing this? Over money. Over $1 million. Over lying to my face for 30 years. Over slapping me like I'm some disobedient child. I touched my throbbing cheek. But sure, reduce it to over money. He threw the socks in the suitcase. You'll never prove anything. That ledger's just notes. Funny. I flipped it open to a random page. June 2017 3000 to account 4872. I looked up. Bank records don't lie Louis. And neither do tax returns. His face went slack. For the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. I pressed my advantage. I wonder what the ears would think about undeclared gifts totaling. I made a show of counting pages. Oh, over $1 million. You wouldn't watch me. He lunged for the ledger. I sidestepped, and he stumbled, catching himself on the bedpost. When he straightened, his face was purple with rage. You selfish cunt, Bianca needed. I slapped him. Hard, the crack echoed off the walls. His head snapped sideways, glasses flying. We both froze, shocked by the violence. Louis touched his reddening cheek. You hit me. I did. I flexed my stinging fingers, and unlike you, I'm not sorry. A car horn honked outside. The locksmith, right on time. I stepped back into the hall. Get out before he gets here. Or I file assault charges to go with the fraud. Louis stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. The woman who took his shit for 30 years was gone. Louis didn't leave. He stood there, one hand still pressed to his cheek, the other gripping the suitcase handle like he might hurl it at me. His breath came in short, angry bursts. You think you're so clever, he spat. But you won't win this. That money was as much mine as yours. I crossed my arms. Funny how you only remember that now. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You never appreciated what I did for this family. Bianca was drowning. And you let me drown instead. The words came out colder than I expected. You watched me work double shifts. You told Matt we couldn't afford his school trip. You made me feel guilty for buying a new coat when mine had holes in it. I tilted my head. Was that part of the fun? Watching me struggle while you played the generous brother. His jaw clenched. You retwisting this? No, I am finally seeing it clearly. The doorbell rang. The locksmith. I didn't move. 30 years, Louis. You didn't just steal from me. You made me complicit in my own betrayal. His face darkened. You're being hysterical. Hysterical. I laughed, sharp and brittle. No. Hysterical was when I begged you to let Matt see a specialist for his asthma. Hysterical was when I cried because I couldn't afford to visit my dying mother. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the coffee on his breath. This is just me waking up. The doorbell rang again. Louis's eyes darted toward the sound, then back to me. For a second, I saw something flicker. Panic, maybe. The realization that he was losing control. Then it hardened into defiance. You'll regret this, he said again, like a curse. I turned and walked toward the front door. Doubt it. Behind me, I heard the suitcase wheels roll across the floor. The first lock clicked open as Louis's car peeled out of the driveway. The new locks gleamed under the porch light as I tested the deadbolt. Solid. Unyielding. Just like the truth I could no longer escape. Inside, the house felt cavernous. I wandered to Matt's old room, unchanged since he left for college, the shelves still lined with soccer trophies. My finger left a trail in the dust. The phone rang. Matt's name flashed on the screen. I knew why he was calling before I answered. Mom. His voice was tight. Dad's here. He's a mess. I leaned against the doorframe. And? He let out a disbelieving laugh. You kicked him out over some money drama with Aunt Bianca. After 30 years. Some money drama. My grip tightened on the phone. He stole over $1 million from us. Matt. While you wore second-hand cleats. While we ate oatmeal for dinner. Because times were tough. Silence. Then a dismissive sigh. Mom, come on. Dad said you're blowing this out of proportion. Bianca was struggling. So were we. The words ripped out of me. Remember your asthma attack in 8th grade. The one where we waited 3 days to go to the ER. Because Dad said we couldn't afford it. Matt hesitated. That was different. No. It wasn't. I opened his closet, revealing the patched knees of his old jeans. While you wore these, Bianca's kids went to private school. While I drove a car with no AC, she took vacations. Jesus, Mom. Matt's voice hardened. You're really keeping score now. I stared at the faded sticker on his bedroom mirror. Faye one son. My reflection stared back, fractured by the crack running through it. No, I said quietly. I'm just finally adding it up. I hung up before he could reply. Down the hall, our wedding photo smiled from the wall. I took it down, glass and all, and dropped it in the trash. The shatter sounded like freedom. The phone rang again at 3 a.m. This time it was the hospital. Mrs. Calloway, your husband was admitted with chest pains. I sat up, the sheets tangled around me. For a stupid, fleeting second, my body moved on instinct. Reaching for my robe, car keys, the emergency cash stash in my dresser. Then I stopped. Let Bianca take care of him. I hung up. The dark pressed in around me. 30 years of shared nights in this bed. 30 years of listening to his breathing, counting his snores. 30 years of being the first person he'd call if something went wrong. Until tonight, I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. Then I dressed in silence, grabbed my keys, and drove to the hospital. Not for him. For me. The air smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Louis looked small in the bed, wires snaking from his chest to beeping machines. His face was gray. He blinked when he saw me. Stella, I didn't touch him. Didn't sit. Just stood at the foot of the bed like a visitor. They think it's stress. His throat worked. Matt called you. No, I met his eyes. The hospital did. You still had me listed as your emergency contact. The heart monitor spiked. A nurse glanced over. Louis' fingers plucked at the blanket. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I. We studied each other across the sterile distance. The man who shared my life. The stranger who stolen it. The doctor came in, clipboard in hand. Good news, no heart attack, just severe stress. He smiled between us. Must be quite the argument. Louis looked away. I turned to leave. Stella, his voice cracked. Thank you. I didn't. He look back. Change your emergency contact. The automatic doors hissed shut behind me. Outside, the first hints of dawn streaked the sky. I breathed deep. The air smelled like rain, like starting over. The hospital coffee tasted like burnt rubber. I clutched the paper cup just to feel its heat as Matt stormed into the waiting room. His face thunderous. You came. His voice dripped with accusation. I took a slow sip, and left. He loomed over me, taller than Louis now, with the same stubborn set to his jaw. Dad could be died, and you just spare me. I set the cup down. He has fine. And he has Bianca now, doesn't he? Matt's nostrils flared. She's his sister. Family helps family. The hypocrisy burned worse than the coffee. I reached into my bag and slid a photocopy across the table. The ledger page from Matt's 16th birthday. March 2004 Bianca's pool installation. The 15,000 same month. Can't afford driver said for Matt too expensive. Matt glanced at it, then pushed it away. Ancient history. Not to me. I tapped the date. You walked to school that year, through snow. Because your father said we couldn't swing a used car. He crossed his arms. And now you're punishing him for helping Aunt Bianca. She was a single mom. So was I. The words tore out louder than I intended. Several heads turned. I lowered my voice. The difference is, no one helped me. Matt's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression softening. Lily S. here with Mason. Ah, the grandson Louis adored. The one who called Bianca Grandma B. I stood smoothing my coat. Then you don't need me. Mom. He caught my wrist. Just talk to Dad, forgive him. He's old, sick. I pulled free. Funny how that only matters now. Through the glass doors, I saw Lily unbuckling Mason from his car seat. The boy was laughing, clutching a toy Bianca had undoubtedly bought him. I walked out the back exit. Some alliances were forged long before we ever saw the battle lines. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Crisp, legal, and utterly final. Louis called within the hour. This is ridiculous, he spat through the phone. We're not some trashy couple splitting over an affair. No, I agreed, staring out the kitchen window at the empty bird feeder. An affair would have been cheaper. A sharp inhale. Then the familiar tone of wounded righteousness. I won't sign this. You will. I traced a finger along the counter's edge. Or I take the ledger to the ears. Prison orange would clash with your complexion. Silence. Then a hissed, you bitch. The words should have stung. Instead, they rolled off like rain. I hung up. Matt showed up unannounced that evening, Mason in tow. The boy barreled into the house, clutching a crayon drawing. A stick figure family with Louis, Bianca and himself, all smiles under a yellow sun. No me. Look, Grandma, Mason beamed, oblivious. Daddy helped me with the letters. I studied the careful print at the top. Happy birthday, Grandma B. Matt watched me, testing. He adores her. I see that. I ruffled Mason's hair, my fingers lingering on his soft curls, so like Matt's at that age. Ice cream. The boy whooped, already racing to the freezer. Matt blocked my path. Mom, don't do this. I reached around him for the chocolate syrup. It's already done. You're choosing money over family. I squeezed the bottle too hard. A dark splatter hit the counter like blood. No, Louis did, 30 years ago. Mason giggled as I drizzled syrup over his bowl. His tiny hands were sticky when he hugged me goodbye later. Matt didn't meet my eyes as they left. The door clicked shut. I wiped the chocolate off the counter. Some stains, at least, came out easy. The house settled into a new rhythm. I cooked single portions now. Seared salmon with lemon, vibrant stir fries, desserts I actually tasted instead of saving for others. The fridge held only what I wanted. Crisp greens, expensive cheeses, a single bottle of wine I opened just because I could. No more scraping leftovers into Tupperware. No more counting pennies at the grocery store. Louis called again. I let it go to voicemail. Stella, be reasonable. The house is half mine, delete. I painted the bedroom that weekend. A deep ocean blue Louis would have hated. Brushed the color over the nail holes where his golf trophies used to hang. The scent of fresh paint clung to my hands as I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a travel brochure. Greece, maybe, or Bali, places we'd never gone because money was tight. My phone buzzed. Matt, again. Mom, we need to talk. I set it aside. The silence stretched, thick but not heavy, not like before. That night, I ate dinner at the table. Just me, a book, and a glass of wine. No arguments over bills. No snide remarks about my cooking. No ledger hidden in some drawer, bleeding our life away. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Matt stood shifting from foot to foot, Mason asleep in his arms. My finger hovered over the lock, then I stepped back. The bell rang twice more before footsteps retreated down the porch steps. I finished my wine in one slow sip. The house hummed around me. The fridge. The clock, the quiet creak of settling bones. For the first time in 30 years, the silence wasn't lonely. It was mine. The lawyer's email included photos. Louis dining at expensive steakhouses. Boarding a weekend flight to Vegas. A shiny new watch glinting on his wrist in one particularly damning shot. Per your request, the attorney wrote. Evidence of dissipation of marital assets. I zoomed in on the receipt from a 400 dinner. Dated 2 days after Louis had told me we couldn't afford to fix the furnace. My coffee had gone cold. I poured it down the sink, watching the bitter swirl disappear. Matt called as I was reviewing the financial disclosures. Dad says you're trying to bankrupt him. His voice was tight. I scrolled to a photo of Louis grinning over lobster. Funny, he never seemed to mind bankrupting me. That's not. Matt cut himself off. Mason babbled in the background. Look, can we just meet? Talk like adults. I almost said no. Then I heard it, the faint tremor in his voice. The one he used as a kid when he was scared but trying to be brave. Tomorrow, I said. The diner by your place. The attorney's last attachment was a bank statement. Louis's new account, already drained to near zero. Lavish dinners, first-class tickets, a 12,000 Rolex, all purchased since I'd kicked him out, all with money he'd claimed we never had. I closed the laptop. Tomorrow I'd see my son. Tonight, I had a date with a shredder and 30 years of tax returns. The machine devoured the papers with a satisfying growl. Louis's carefully crafted lies turned to confetti in seconds. I swept the remnants into the trash. Some things were beyond repair. The diner smelled of bacon and burnt toast. Matt slid into the booth, his face drawn. Before he could speak, the bell above the door jingled. Bianca swept in like she owned the place. Designer handbag, freshly highlighted hair, that same simpering smile she'd used at every family funeral. Matt brightened. Aunt, you made it. I didn't move as she air-kissed his cheek before turning to me. Stella, you look tired. The waitress approached. Bianca ordered a latte with almond milk and extra foam, then patted Matt's hand. Mason's with Andrea at the park. They're inseparable. My fingers tightened around my coffee cup. Andrea, Bianca's son, the one whose Ivy League tuition Louis had paid while Matt took out student loans. Bianca leaned in, oozing Fox concern. I heard about the divorce. So tragic after all these years. Tragic, I set my cup down. You mean back when Louis was funneling our savings to you? Her smile didn't waver. Oh honey, that was just family helping family. Matt stiffened. Mom. Remember when you needed braces, Matt? I kept my eyes on Bianca. Louis said we couldn't afford it. Turns out he'd just paid $8,000 for Andrew's ski trip that same month. Bianca's manicured nails tapped the table. Boys need experiences. And daughters? I asked sweetly, like when Lisa got that BMOS for her sweet 16. While I took the bus to work, the lad arrived. Bianca stirred it slowly. Louis always said you were frugal. The word hung in the air like poison. Matt looked between us, conflicted. I dropped a 20 on the table. Enjoy your foam. Bianca's mask slipped as I stood, just for a second, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Then it was back, all saccharine smiles. Do visit Mason soon. He asks about you. I walked out into the sunlight, their murmurs fading behind me. Mason. The only one who didn't know he was a pawn. The bell jingled again. Matt called after me, Mom. Wait. I didn't turn around. Some games weren't worth playing. The park was empty except for a lone figure pushing a child on the swings. Mason's delighted shrieks carried across the grass as Andrea, now a grown man with his mother's calculating eyes, scrolled through his phone with one hand, barely paying attention. I watched from a distance, the attorney's folder heavy in my bag. Mason spotted me first. "Grandma." He tumbled off the swing and sprinted over, grass-stained knees and all. I caught him mid-leap, his small arms tight around my neck. Andre looked up, his smile fading. "Aunt Stella." The title dripped with irony. Mason tugged my hand. "Come push me?" Andre tossed his phone on the bench. "She's busy, kid." "Actually," I said, "I've got time." For the next 20 minutes, I pushed Mason higher and higher, his laughter ringing in the crisp air. Andre watched, arms crossed, until Mason begged for ice cream. "I'll take him," Andre snapped, grabbing Mason's wrist a little too hard. The boy winced. Something inside me twisted. "Let go of him." My voice was low. Andre smirked but released Mason, who rubbed his arm, confused. "What's wrong, Grandma?" I knelt to his level. "Nothing, sweetheart." I smoothed his hair. "But Grandma has to go. Be good for." I glanced at Andra. "Be good." As I turned to leave, Andra leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. "You lost, Auntie. Move on." I stepped back, studying his face. The spoiled smirk, the arrogance, the unshakable belief that the world owed him everything. Just like Louis. Just like Bianca. I adjusted the strap of my bag, the folder inside brimming with bank records, forged signatures, and 30 years of theft. "Funny," I said lightly. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." Mason waved as I walked away. Andre didn't. The attorney would be waiting. The attorney's office smelled of leather and expensive coffee. I set the park incident aside for now. There'd be time for that later. Right now, the numbers mattered more. "We've got them." My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane, spread the documents across the table. "Bank fraud. Tax evasion. The forged signatures alone are enough for criminal charges." I traced the shaky imitation of my name on a 2003 withdrawal slip. Louis had never been good at forgery. Diane tapped a highlighted figure. "They took $1.35 million over 30 years. With interest and penalties, we're seeking $1 million in restitution." The number should have felt vindicating. Instead, it just felt hollow. No amount of money could give me back the years of doubt, the nights I'd lain awake wondering why we were always struggling. "What about the house?" I asked. Diane smiled. "Yours. Free and clear. Louis never contested the title because he thought you'd never find out." The irony burned. His arrogance had finally cost him something. My phone buzzed. "Mad again." I silenced it. Diane studied me. "There's another option. We could press criminal charges. Louis and Bianca could face jail time." The words hung in the air. I imagined Louis in an orange jumpsuit, Bianca's perfect hair in a messy bun, both of them stripped of everything they'd stolen. It was tempting. But no. I closed the folder. "Just get my money back." Diane raised an eyebrow. "That's generous." "It's not generosity." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Jail would let them play the victim. This," I gestured to the papers, "this forces them to admit what they did. And that, the humiliation, the exposure, would hurt worse than any prison sentence." Diane grinned. "I'll file tomorrow." Outside, the sun was setting. I took the long way home, past the bakery where Louis had always forbidden me to shop. Tonight, I bought the most extravagant cake they had. Just for me. The courthouse steps were cold under my palms as I waited for Diane. Around me, lawyers hurried by with briefcases. Defendants shuffled in with nervous glances. The machinery of justice grinding on, indifferent to my small story within it. Diane emerged, her heels clicking sharply. They folded. She handed me a check. "First installment, $250,000. The rest is structured over 5 years." The paper felt flimsy for all it represented, and Louis signed the divorce papers this morning. Diane smirked. Bianca was furious, kept calling it extortion. I folded the check into my wallet. Did she now? We walked down the steps together. The morning air was crisp, clean. Diane hesitated before parting ways. "For what it's worth, most clients in your position want blood. I admire your restraint." I adjusted my sunglasses. "Who said I'm done?" A beat. Then Diane laughed, sharp and knowing. "Call me when you're ready for round 2. I drove past Louis's new apartment on the way home. A cramped complex with peeling paint, A far cry from the house he'd lost. His car was missing, probably off playing the wounded hero for Bianca. The mailbox at home held a single envelope, no return address. Inside, a child's drawing. Mason's wobbly stick figures under a crayon sun. This time, the family portrait included me. On the back, in Matt's handwriting, "He misses you." I pinned it to the fridge, right over the spot where Lewis's golf schedule used to hang. The phone rang as I poured a glass of wine. Unknown number. I answered. Silence, then a shaky breath. "Stella." Lewis's voice, raw and aged. "Can we?" I hung up. The wine tasted sweeter than I remembered. The new deadbolt slid into place with a satisfying click. I tested it twice. Once gently, once with a hard shove of my shoulder. It held. The house was different now. Lewis's recliner was gone, donated to Goodwill. The walls bore fresh paint in colors he would have hated. Deep reds, bold blues, no more of his sterile beige. His absence was carved into every room, and for the first time, the space felt like mine. My phone buzzed. "Matt, again. Dad's outside your house. He's upset." I peered through the blinds. Lewis stood on the porch, his face flushed, fists clenched at his sides. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a deflated version of the man who'd once filled every room with his demands. I didn't open the door. He pounded on it instead. "Stella!" His voice was hoarse, ragged at the edges. "You can't just cut me out like this." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching his shadow shift under the crack of light at the threshold. "I already did." A pause. Then his fist hit the wood again, harder. "This is my house too." "Not anymore." Silence. Then a different tone, lower, desperate. "You're really going to leave me with nothing?" I thought of the years I'd spent with nothing. The years he'd watched it happen. "No," I said softly. "I'm leaving you with exactly what you gave me." His breath hitched. For a second, I thought he might say something real. Something honest. Then his voice hardened. "You'll regret this." I stepped back from the door. I should have done it 30 years ago. His footsteps retreated down the porch steps. A car door slammed. An engine roared to life. Inside, the house was quiet. I poured myself a drink and toasted the empty room. To new locks, to fresh starts. To finally being the one who walked away. The pounding started at 3 a.m. I woke to the sound of fists hammering against the front door, hard enough to rattle the frame. Through the peephole, Lewis's face was a distorted mask of rage, his breath fogging the glass. "Open the damn door, Stella!" I flipped the porch light on. His suit was rumpled, tie loose, probably straight from some bar where he'd been drowning his sorrows. I didn't unlock it. Just spoke through the wood. "You retrespassing." His laugh was ugly. "This is my house!" I glanced at the security camera installed last week, its tiny red light blinking. "Check the deed." Lewis kicked the door. The deadbolt held. "I'll call the cops." "Please do." I tapped the camera. "They all love seeing you drunk and disorderly while violating a restraining order." A pause. His bloodshot eyes flickered to the lens. You wouldn't." I held up my phone, thumb hovering over 911. "Try me." For a long moment, we stood frozen. Him on the wrong side of the door, me on the right. Then his shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. "You've changed," he slurred. "No." I lowered the phone. "I just stopped pretending." His mouth worked soundlessly, some last insult dying on his tongue. Then he turned and stumbled down the steps, nearly tripping over the azaleas he'd never let me plant. I watched his taillights disappear before checking the locks again. The house sighed back into silence. I didn't sleep. Just sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching dawn creep across the floor. The first night had been the hardest. This one was easier. The coffee shop was too bright, too loud. Matt sat across from me, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm on the table. Mason played with crayons in the corner under Lily's watchful eye. My daughter-in-law shooting me apologetic glances. Matt leaned in. "You need to drop this." I stirred my tea. "Drop what, exactly?" "The money. The house. All of it." His jaw tightened. "Dad's a wreck. Bianca's stressed. Andre had to postpone his wedding because of the lawsuit." The crayon snapped in Mason's hands. Lily quickly replaced it. I set my spoon down, and Matt's fist hit the table. Cups rattled. Hand, you're tearing this family apart. A few heads turned. Lily winced. I kept my voice low. No, Matt. Your father did that when he stole from us. When he lied. When he chose Bianca over you. Over and over again. He flinched but didn't back down. If you keep this up, you'll die alone. Is that what you want? The words should have hurt. Instead, they settled like dust. Weightless, meaningless. Mason toddled over then, clutching a crooked drawing. For you, Grandma. The paper showed 4 stick figures. Me, him, Lily, and a tiny blob he proudly declared was their cat. No Matt, no Lewis. I tucked it into my bag. Thank you, sweetheart. Matt's face darkened. He stood abruptly, chair screeching. Come on, Lily, we're leaving. She hesitated, mouthing I'm sorry as she gathered Mason. I stayed seated, watching my son stomp out. So like his father in that moment. The bell jingled behind them. My tea had gone cold. I left it there. Some ultimatums aren't threats. They're gifts. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. No dramatic outbursts. No last-minute reversals. Just the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, and the judge's monotone recitation of the ruling. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $1.35 million, plus interest at 5% annually from date of each unauthorized withdrawal. Lewis slumped in his seat. Bianca, seated behind him, gripped the bench hard enough to turn her knuckles white. The gavel cracked. Diane squeezed my arm. We won. I nodded, watching Lewis shuffle out without meeting my eyes. Bianca lingered, her designer heels clicking as she approached. Happy now? She hissed. I adjusted my bag. Not yet. Her smile was razor thin. You'll never collect it all. We'll drag this out for years. Maybe. I leaned in, close enough to smell her overpriced perfume. But the lay-in on your house is already filed. The wage garnishment starts next week, and Andre. I glanced at her son lurking in the hallway. His fancy law firm just got copies of the fraud evidence. Wonder how long he'll stay engaged once his fiancée sees those. Bianca's breath hitched. For the first time in 30 years, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Outside, the sun was blinding. Diane chattered about next steps, but I barely heard her. The check in my purse wasn't closure. But it was a start. The bank teller's eyebrows shot up when I slid the check across the counter. Will you be depositing this all at once, Ms. Calloway? I glanced at the number. $250,000, the first installment of what Lewis and Bianca owed. The ink glistened under the fluorescent lights. Yes, I said. And I'd like to open a new account. The process took 20 minutes. When I walked out, the autumn air smelled like crisp leaves and possibility. I drove straight to the travel agency. The agent, a bright-eyed woman named Sophia, spread brochures across her desk. Anywhere in particular you were dreaming of? I touched a glossy photo of Santorini, white buildings clinging to cliffs, endless blue sea. The trip Lewis had vetoed for our 20th anniversary. Here, I said. First class. Sophia grinned. Excellent choice. My phone buzzed as she typed up the reservation. Matt again. I silenced it. The printer whirred. Sophia handed me the itinerary with a flourish. You leave in 3 weeks. Outside, I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the tickets. Then I dialed a number I'd saved weeks ago. The nursing home receptionist answered on the second ring. Yes, I said. I'd like to pay my mother's outstanding balance in full. The silence on the other end stretched. Aldo 87,000. All of it. When the call ended, I started the engine. The radio played an old song from my youth. One I hadn't heard in decades. I turned it up and sang along. Loud and off-key, all the way home. The eviction notice arrived in a crisp envelope. Bianca and Lewis had 30 days to vacate the condo Matt had scrambled to rent for them. According to Diane, they demissed the first 3 payments. I was pruning rose bushes when Lily's car pulled up. She hovered by the gate, Mason clutching her hand. Stella, her voice was tentative. Can we talk? I wiped my hands. Depends. Did Matt send you? She shook her head, eyes tired. He doesn't know I'm here. Mason broke free and barreled into my legs. Grandma! Andre pushed me. I froze. Lily's face crumpled. Inside, over tea that went cold, the story spilled out. Andre's temper. Lewis's failing health. The way Bianca still treated Matt's home like her personal hotel. It's a nightmare, Lily whispered. Mason played with blocks at our feet, a fresh bruise visible under his sleeve. Matt won't admit it, but. She met my eyes. We need help. The clock ticked. Mason stacked blocks into a wobbling tower. I took a slow breath. Here's what you do. Lily leaned in, hopeful. Change the locks, I said. And call the police next time Andra lays a hand on your son. Her face fell. You won't. I knelt beside Mason. Look at me, sweetheart. His wide eyes, so like Matt's at that age, locked onto mine. If anyone hurts you, you tell mommy to call 911. Okay, he nodded solemnly. Lily's hands trembled around her cup. I thought you'd fix it. I stood. I spent 30 years fixing Louis' messes. No more. She left soon after. Mason waving from the car window. The roses needed more pruning. I worked until my fingers ached and the thorns drew blood. Some plants, no matter how carefully tended, were just toxic at the root. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I knew before answering. Nobody calls at that hour with good news. Lily's voice was raw with panic. Mason's in the air. Andrew shoved him down the stairs during some stupid argument. Matt's furious but. A muffled sob. Bianca saying it was an accident. Louis won't even look at me. The hospital lights were too bright when I arrived. Mason looked tiny in the bed, his leg in a cast, face streaked with dried tears. Lily rushed over. Thank God you came. They were saying it might need surgery. Across the room, Matt stiffened. Mom. Louis and Bianca sat in the corner, heads together like conspirators. Bianca's eyes narrowed when she saw me. I ignored them all, walking straight to Mason. His small hand clutched mine. It hurts, Grandma. I know, sweetheart. I smoothed his hair, then turned to the nurse. What's the treatment plan? Before she could answer, Matt stepped between us. We've got this handled. Really? I gestured to Mason's leg, because this looks handled. Louis finally spoke from his chair. Stella, don't make a scene. The monitors beeped. Mason whimpered. I met Matt's eyes. Choose. His jaw worked. What? Right now? Your son or your father's lies? Bianca stood abruptly. How dare you? Andrew would never. Security's coming, the nurse warned. Matt looked between Mason and Louis, agony twisting his features. Lily touched his arm. Baby, she whispered. Please. A long silence. Then Matt's shoulders slumped. He walked to the nurse's station. I need to file a police report. Louis' gasp was almost comical. Bianca's shriek wasn't as chaos erupted. I sat with Mason, humming an old lullaby. The first domino had fallen. The police took Andre in handcuffs just before dawn. Bianca's screams followed them down the hallway. He's a good boy? You're ruining his life. Until security escorted her out. Lily slept in the chair beside Mason's bed. Matt stood by the window, staring at his reflection like he didn't recognize himself. I packed up my purse. You're leaving? Matt's voice cracked. I slung the strap over my shoulder. He's stable. You've filed charges. My work here is done. Matt grabbed my arm. Mom, wait. His grip tightened, then fell away. I don't know what to do. The sunrise painted the room orange. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. You're his father, I said. Figure it out. Lily stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. Stella, thank you. For everything. I paused at the door. One condition, they waited. Mason's soft snores filled the silence. Never ask me to clean up Louis' messes again. The elevator doors closed on Matt's stricken face. Outside, the morning air smelled like rain and gasoline. I breathed deep, started the car, and drove away without checking the rearview mirror. Some roads only go forward. The call came 3 weeks later. Louis had collapsed at the courthouse during Andre's assault hearing. Massive stroke, the doctor said. He's stable, but there's significant damage. I stood at the hospital's coffee machine, watching the black liquid fill the cup. Matt approached, hollow-eyed. He keeps asking for you. I added sugar, stirred, and Matt's hands clenched. Mom, he can't walk. His speech is, God, it's like he's drowning in his own head. The coffee burned my tongue, just how I liked it now. Bianca with him. Matt flinched. She left, took what was left of their money and flew to her sister's in Florida. I almost laughed. The irony was too perfect. Matt grabbed my wrist. He's your husband. Was. I pulled free, and you made your choice. The words hung between us. Mason's cast. Andre's smirk. 30 years of lies laid bare. Matt's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I set the coffee down, untouched. I know. The hallway stretched endlessly toward Louis' room. I turned the other way. Some debts even a stroke couldn't repay. The nursing home smelled like antiseptic and boiled vegetables. Louis sat by the window in a wheelchair, his right side slumped, his mouth twisted into a permanent frown. A newspaper lay unread in his lap. The headline about Andrus' conviction still visible. He didn't notice me at first. When he did, his good eye widened. His left hand twitched. Tst. I set the photo album on his bedside table, the one he kept hidden in his office. Inside, pictures of Bianca's kids at Disneyland, graduating college, opening Christmas presents. All the moments Matt had missed because we couldn't afford it. Louis made a wet, choking sound. "I'm not here for forgiveness," I said. "I'm here so you know I know." His working hand flailed toward the call button. I tucked it gently back into his lap. Bianca's in Miami with her new boyfriend. Andre's serving 18 months. Matt's selling his house to pay your medical bills. I leaned down, close to his ear. Was it worth it? Spittle ran down his chin, his good eye filled with tears. I straightened my coat. "Goodbye, Louis." The hallway was quiet. At the front desk, the receptionist smiled. "Visiting hours end at 8. I'm done," I said. Outside, the sun was setting. I breathed deep, started the car, and didn't look back. Some prisons don't need bars. The Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of salt and citrus, as I adjusted my camera lens. Through the viewfinder, the Santorini cliffs glowed gold in the sunset, whitewashed buildings clinging to the rocks like pearls. I snapped the shot. Perfect. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Matt again. The third call this week. Probably more news about Louis's decline. Or maybe another plea for money. I silenced it and ordered another ouzo from the waiter. The drink arrived with a bowl of fat Kalamata olives. Across the table, my new photography instructor, a silver-haired Greek woman named Eleni, raised her glass. "To capturing truth," she said in her rich accent. I clinked my glass against hers. "To seeing clearly." Later, back at my rented villa, I uploaded the day's photos to my blog. Widow's Walks, a woman's second act. The comments section brimmed with messages from other women who'd found themselves starting over. One caught my eye. "Your story gave me the courage to leave." Thank you. I poured another drink and stepped onto the balcony. The Aegean stretched endlessly under the moonlight, no boundaries in sight. Somewhere in Arizona, Louis stared at nursing home walls. Bianca scrambled to maintain her fading looks. Matt learned the hard cost of loyalty. And here I stood, alone, unbroken, utterly free. The waves crashed against the cliffs far below, relentless and unconcerned with the small dramas of human hearts. I raised my glass to the horizon. To fresh starts, to hard truths, to finally living life on my own damn terms.